Hi, and welcome to episode 133 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Marco.
And I'm Tarek.
And thanks for joining us on the podcast, where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing journeys, find out how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. Now, this is a slightly different episode because we're speaking with experts behind the scenes to take your written manuscript into a book and maybe even onto a film. So we've gathered together some of the leading experts, agents, editors, even Hollywood managers, and spoken to them to create a series of behind-the-scenes episodes that can hopefully help your perfect manuscript turn into that Hollywood movie eventually. And today we're kicking off with a brilliant literary agent, Juliet Mushens.
Yeah, we're starting off with an agent superstar here. Juliet Mushens began her career as an agent back in 2011 and has won the Literary Agent of the Year 4 times, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, amazing.
She looks after some of the biggest writers in the business, such as Richard Osman, Laura Lamb, Jessie Burton, and she has some really fantastic practical tips and advice for people. You know, what does she want to see in your letter? How many pages should you be sending in? What's important to an agent that you might be wondering about when you're sending in your submissions?
Yeah, it's all the sort of things that whether you're querying now or you're thinking of querying, it's the stuff that you're worried about, and it's always great getting that advice firsthand from someone like Juliet, who, as we say, really is one of the leading UK agents. So we'll get straight into it, and we hope you enjoy the episode.
On with the podcast.
So when we have writers on, I always ask, did you always want to be a writer? But did you always want to be an agent? Because I know you studied history at uni, so was publishing something you always were interested in getting into?
So I didn't know anything about publishing. I didn't actually know agents existed really until a reasonable way into my journey. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I graduated. I thought I might want to work in heritage. So I did a couple of stints of work experience at museums, or I thought maybe I'd sell out and go into law or banking or something like that. I really had no idea. And then when I was at uni, I was whinging about it to one of my friends, and she just said, look, Juliet, you read faster than anyone I have ever met. You're always reading. Why don't you go into publishing? And I remember Googling jobs in publishing and looking on my university careers website, and they were advertising an internship at HarperCollins, which was a paid summer internship. So I'm from Essex, and costing, I can't remember how much it would have cost to commute in. It was a very long time ago. It's probably something like £300-400 a month. So nowadays we've made much more positive steps, I think, as an industry in not doing unpaid internships. But back then everything was unpaid, and for me, the travel, I couldn't have afforded to do it. So HarperCollins was offering minimum wage, and it meant that I could actually do the internship. So I applied for it. And once I got through the first stage, they then sectioned out the internship. So once you got through that stage, you had to decide which department you wanted to work in. And I basically thought publishing was just editors. So the internships were actually editorial, marketing, publicity, or sales. And from the descriptions of each of them, because again, it was very opaque at that time, most places didn't even have a workable website or really FAQs or anything like that. So I thought, wow, this is so interesting. I'm actually learning what the different parts of the business do. And I had no idea how different they were. So the idea of marketing really appealed to me. And I went for that job, all guns blazing, and did not get it. But I was their second choice. It was for the children's marketing team, and I was their second choice. And it happened that the adult fiction marketing department needed an intern. So they offered me a role instead for a month, and they were interviewing for a replacement for their current marketing assistant who was leaving to work in a theatre. And they were about 2 weeks into the interviews, and they weren't going very well because everyone they interviewed would say things like, well, obviously I want to be an editor, or I don't really like commercial fiction, I want to work on literary fiction, whereas I love commercial fiction and didn't really want to be an editor. And they were complaining, and I just turned to my boss and I was like, do you want me to apply for the job? And she said, yeah, actually that would be great. So I got the job at the end of that. And once I'd been there a couple of years, I graduated into the middle of the recession, and they had a hiring freeze, and one of the editorial assistants quit whilst I was there and they wouldn't replace him. So I inherited his editorial assistant job as well as my marketing assistant job, which gave me a real overview, I think, over a core chunk of the business. And I thought, actually, editorial for me, I don't love, because it's just about the words, it's just about the books, and it's not that salesy. And marketing, I really like coming up with copy and positioning and marketing and sales, but I miss working on the books. And by that point, I'd met a couple of agents, and I thought, who are these terrifying figures that when they sweep into the office and chuck their coat on someone's desk, the really mean editor has to jump to it. I was like, I want that kind of power. And I applied to be a PA to 2 agents at an agency and got that role. And within a couple of weeks there, thought, you know what, this is actually what I really love, because it combines getting to work in a really hands-on way on manuscripts and work really closely with authors. Also, it means I can work across the board on books. So as a publisher, as an editor, you tend to specialize. So you'll do non-fiction, or you'll do science fiction, fantasy, or you'll do crime, or you'll do literary fiction. Whereas if you look at my list, it really ranges. I represent Richard Osman, who is obviously a hugely best-selling crime novelist, but then I represent Jessie Burton, who wrote multi-million copy best-selling historical novel, The Miniaturist, or Taran Matharu, who has sold 8 million copies of his YA fantasy. And had I stayed in an editorial department, I'd have had to pick a lane and stay in it. Whereas in agenting, I could move across the board. And I also am very business-minded, and I like the selling of books as well. So I feel like I get to use my marketing background and my editorial background. And I'm always particularly smug when copy that I've written in a submission letter for the publisher makes it onto the book. And amazingly, recently I had a publisher tested a load of copy lines, and my one from the original pitch outperformed every single other copy line they had. And I was like, guys, you're welcome. You can bring me in if you want. So sorry, that was quite a long-winded potted history, but basically I had no idea what agents were. And I feel very lucky that I've ended up in a job that seems to really particularly suit my skill set.
It's interesting what you say there about the seeing the agents as these people that came in, and the editors all jumped up to try and speak to them and stuff, because we were asking actually an editor just yesterday, it was actually, about the sort of hierarchy, because you know, if you're an author, you're trying to catch the attention of agents, and then agents presumably are trying to catch the attention of editors, and then internally editors are trying to persuade other people in the publishing house as to whether or not a book should go ahead. I mean, is it as simple a hierarchy as that, or what you're saying suggests that there is a bit less of a strict hierarchy in that?
Yeah, definitely. I would say there is much less of a strict hierarchy. I think that the way I always approach it is we're on a team. So the author, the agent, and the editor are on a team. So the editor wants the book to sell well. I want the book to sell well. The author wants the book to sell well. I would say that the agent and the author have the closest relationship, and often that's because of the consistency. So some of my authors I've represented for 12 years since I first became an agent. They might have moved editor 3 or 4 times, or they might have moved publishing house, but I've been the consistent person throughout the process. I would say that there definitely is an element of wanting to catch editors' attentions. And when I was an agent at the start of my career, I definitely felt like I was terrified of editors. And when I sent out a submission, it might take months sometimes to hear back on something or something like that. Whereas once you've got an established track record, editors want to receive submissions from you. So even if a book is a no for them, they will still want to stay on your good side to make sure that they're included in your submissions going forwards. So I would say there are definitely editors that I've sold to really consistently throughout my career, and we have a really positive relationship, whilst also recognizing the fact that there will be times when I disagree with them because I think maybe their marketing plan for a book is wrong, or I'm not convinced by their positioning or the jacket or what have you. But it's still, even when you have that occasional antagonism, I suppose, it always comes from a mutually respectful point. And I always talk a lot about this internally, that I think as an agent you often have to remove your ego from the process of publishing, that it's not about being right, it's about getting the best result for your author. And sometimes that's saying, I don't necessarily agree with this stance, but they've come up with this explanation, they really believe in it, so actually I think it's going to be for the best in the long run. if we accept their expertise.
Yeah. And as an agent, I mean, I suppose two-part question. One, how many submissions do you get on a weekly basis? And what is it about a query that really makes it stand out from that, no doubt, massive number?
Yeah, so we have a shared submissions inbox. So you send to, there are 4 agents working here. So you send to a general submissions inbox and just mark it for the attention of one. So we probably receive as an agency maybe 8,000 a year, something like that.
Wow,
We all
that's
have
crazy.
Yeah, and we all have slightly different tastes, or sometimes something. It was funny, we go through our submissions inbox every Tuesday afternoon. We sit down, all 4 of us, and we go through, and something might have come in for me, but I'll say, oh, it's got this very specific thing in, like if it's a toxic friendship or it's millennial, I know my colleague Rachel will want to see it rather than me. Or if it's something involving the French Revolution or heists or sexy elves, I know that my colleague Liza is going to be all over that one. So,
sexy elf? How many sexy elf
elves.
submissions do you get?
Well, quite a few. I mean, Sarah J. Maas has made a bit of a name for herself in that area of the market. So you tend to learn quite quickly. Whereas if it's something involving a child killer, a cult, or multiple wives, it's always like Juliet will want to see that one. So we do share submissions internally, and quite a few of people who've been signed by the agency might have submitted to me, but I've passed them to my colleagues because I know it's better fit. When it comes to what makes something leap out to me, I am really drawn to high concept books. So what I mean by that, and it's probably partly my marketing background, but partly just my taste in books, is books which are quite easy to pitch. So a quiet character study, I'm probably not your gal. It's not really my cup of tea. Whereas something like The Couple at Number 9 by my author Claire Douglas, which has sold 250,000 copies, the pitch for that is a young woman inherits a home from her grandmother who has Alzheimer's. They do some renovations in the garden and they discover 2 dead bodies that date back to when her grandmother lived there. Was her grandmother involved? Unfortunately, she can't remember. So it's those books that have quite a clear hook. You get a real sense of who the character is and what the question is at the heart of the novel, and whether that's in historical fiction like Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, which I represented, which was a feminist retelling of the Ariadne myth from the perspective of Ariadne and Phaedra, or it's the Thursday Murder Club, a group of pensioners in a luxury retirement village clubbed together to solve cold cases and finally have a real murder on their hands. So books that have that very neat top line hook, I'm quite drawn to. And I would say that cover letters which hint at the reading experience I'm going to get, that's what I'm looking for. It doesn't need to be a flashy, funny, particularly innovative cover letter, to be honest. It just needs to tell me the hook at the heart of the book, what experience I'm going to get. I think presented professionally, rough genre, a couple of books or a couple of authors you think you sit alongside, and then a hook and a bit more of a blurb from the back of the book. And what I love is those queries where I reach the end and I think, I have a million other things to do, but I'm going to open the pages right now because I want to know how this author is going to handle that.
And just staying on the query letter a moment, one thing that authors can, or authors doing the queries can worry about are things like comps and things like that. You read things that are sort of like must be within the last 5 years and all this sort of thing. I mean, how strict is that? Or is it more just to give you a flavour of what the book is, essentially?
I would say it's always a flavour. I think of it as shorthand. And it's think about, if I'm describing a film to someone or a TV series, I will normally say something like, oh, if you love the Ipcress file, definitely check out The Americans. So it doesn't necessarily mean they're exactly the same, but it means you're gonna know, oh, it's spies, it's complex characters, it's quite dark, it's quite adult. So I would always say to authors that even if they can't think of like, it's Fingersmith meets this, saying readers who enjoy upmarket historical fiction by authors such as Sarah Waters will probably read my book. So thinking about when you go into a bookshop, where would it be stocked? Will it be on the crime shelves or will it be on the historical shelves or the general fiction shelves?
And what's the kind of, I mean, if you had to give a couple of do's and don'ts about query letters, things maybe you've seen people make mistakes on, what kind of advice would you give people?
So I would say be professional. and be confident in yourself, but maybe not arrogant. So I suppose sometimes we get cover letters which say things like, this is going to be the biggest franchise since the Hunger Games, and you're just setting the bar so high that when I open it and read it, it's probably not going to live up to it. So I would say just focusing on the book itself rather than everything around it. So often people say it could be a theme park, it could be a film series, it could be a video game. Just start with the book first, and then everything kind of comes from there. And I would say having really that core information up front, making the cover letter about the book, not about you. So I think a lot of cover letters I see will give me, I guess I think of it that kind of X Factor journey where the person, before they come on stage, talks at length about their journey and how they got to this point in the past 20 years of their life. And all I'm interested in at that stage is the book. And if I love the book, we'll have that conversation about your writing journey, and I'll learn more about you when I offer representation. But what I'm considering is the novel. So you want the cover letter to be about the novel.
Yeah. And do you take on it when you get the submission? Do you sometimes get submissions that you think this is good, but it needs a bit of work? Is that something that you will sometimes take an author on, even if the book needs a bit more work to it?
Yeah, definitely. So I would expect to do a couple of rounds of edits on any book I take on. So I always advise writers, get the book as good as you can possibly get it, but there will probably still be work to do. Yeah. Richard Osman described me in an interview as like an interior designer, that I can walk into a space and be like, that's not a supporting wall, so it can go. And that we can open up a window here. So kind of looking in that macro way of, actually, it's way too obvious who the killer is, or the red herring doesn't pay off, or this subplot pops up 2/3 in and it needs to be pulled back through to the beginning. So there will normally be work that I expect to do with an author. And what I have to weigh up is how much work I think needs to be done versus what I think the payoff will be. So if it's a book that I think could be absolutely phenomenal, and there's quite a bit of work, but actually I think it will be worth it, I'm likely to offer representation. The ones I would say I struggle with are ones where I think it doesn't work, but I don't know how to fix it. Yeah. I just think that's not something maybe another agent will see a way through. Or the ones where I think my edits are so substantive, I'm not sure whether an author would want to do them, or necessarily an author would be capable of doing them, because sometimes I can think, okay, they're a phenomenal writer, it's a great base idea, but they need to lose 60,000 words and write another 60,000 words in those places, which does X, Y, and Z. So in that scenario, I might say to the author, these notes are huge, there is no reason you will want to do them, but if you do them, I would happily read a revised version. And a couple of authors I've signed and sold have been on the back of revised versions that they've submitted me.
Is there a, you may not want to say this, but I mean, is there a percentage of submissions that you get that are just, you know immediately, no, this isn't good enough? Is there a certain slice of those 8,000 queries you get a year that are just like not ready yet, essentially?
Yeah, so I would say there are two stages. There are some that just aren't ready yet. So someone has just reached the end of the book, typed the words "the end," and thought, I'm going to send it out. And actually, I would say it's always better to put it in a drawer for a month, not look at it, and then when you get it out again, you will immediately see much more clearly strengths and weaknesses. Whereas you're too close, you can't see the wood for the trees because you've just done it and you either think it's all terrible or all brilliant. Whereas lots of my authors say the moment they realize the crucial thing that needs to be fixed is the moment they've hit send on the draft to their editor, and that's when they realize, oh, actually, now I've done it, I can see that needs to happen. And I would definitely say there are a portion of queries where it's just no quite quickly. And I'm always struck by a fact I remember an editor telling me years ago, which is something like, more people want to be authors than read books. And so what I think is some people just see it as a bit of a lottery ticket, that it's anyone can do it. And you hear the success stories of people like J.K. Rowling. So you think, okay, I'm going to be a billionaire. This is my ticket to the Hunger Games franchise.
One book and Netflix will come calling and that'll be
sorted. Exactly. So I definitely think there's an element of that. And hey, it's probably true in most industries. Like, we've all seen someone who is terrible at art show you their artwork, right? Where they're like, I'm thinking of selling this, and you're thinking, please, no one's going to buy it. What are you thinking? So it's probably true of multiple.
When you're looking at a book and making that decision about whether to take it on or not, because you're thinking, well, where would this go in the marketplace? You know, you always have to have one eye on what people are, and imagine what editors are looking for. So are you having constant back and forths with editors about what they're looking for, what's selling well, what's the next big thing?
Yeah, so it's a mixed bag, really. So I would say the first thing is, when I'm reading, is, do I love it? And then the second thing is, can I sell it? And without the love, there is no sell. You have to have that passion and that belief to get over the first hurdle. But some books do fall at the can I sell it? And sometimes it's that I maybe have tried something in a similar area before, and editors didn't respond to it for quite a concrete reason, or an editor bought it and then it didn't work in the market for another reason. There are some books I've sold in my career that haven't done that well, that I think were perhaps slightly ahead of their time. So they were trends that I've seen come around maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 years later. And I think, actually, if this author had been published now, they'd be much more successful. But I also tend to think that if I really love something, I am a very commercial person. And if I really respond to something, I tend to think probably editors will respond to it as well, that there's something about it that's going to capture people's attention. And there have certainly been books in my career which were before a trend, or maybe started a trend. So I think I remember when I sold The Miniaturist, a lot of publishers, when I was pitching it, were saying, we're not really sure how this would work. It's feminist golden age historical fiction. That's not really a genre, Juliet. And I was like, I really think there is something here. I think that reading group readers and historical fiction fans will read it. And I would say that book sold millions of copies, was a BBC drama, and is now used as a comparison by many, many other authors in that area. Or The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell, which is a gothic horror. When I sent that out on submission, I had no comparison titles because there wasn't anything else quite like it. Whereas now there are so many books I see launched and sold which have basically an identical cover to The Silent Companions, or say, if you love Laura Purcell, you will love X or Y. So I am not a particularly trend-driven agent, and I don't think I ever will be, which is possibly a peculiarly arrogant thing to say. But I do tend to feel that if I love something and I can recognize a market for it, that I believe editors will. And I think maybe as well, I don't come from a hugely bookish background or family. No one in my family works in publishing. My dad has recently been introduced to Lee Child by me. So he's currently reading Lee Child, which is the only novel I think written this century, apart from the Thursday Murder Club, that he's ever read. He will be reading Proust and for the 5th time, and then a Lee Child novel. And I watch a lot of TV. I read a lot of comics. I read a lot of online comics. I am a wild consumer of general culture. And I think that maybe helps me pick out books which I think the wider public will respond to, rather than always thinking about what have readers read before. It's more about, if people are responding more widely to this particular thing, then I think they'll like this book.
Is there an aspect as well, just following on from that, I suppose, that it can be difficult, publishing isn't a quick process. So, when someone's starting out writing a book, it might be years before it will be years normally before it's in the shop. So the market is going to have changed by that stage anyway. So being beholden to the market as it is probably a mistake anyway.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. A book that I sell now will probably publish in 12 to 18 months. So if you are writing to a trend, you will probably have missed the boat on that trend. And I think that it's much better as a writer to stay true to your vision than it is to think, I'm going to try and do exactly what that person's done. And to come back to Lee Child, whose books I absolutely love, I think there have been so many attempted imitators of Reacher, but there's only one Jack Reacher, actually, and readers who are loyal to him won't necessarily jump to the other books that are attempting to do what he does.
And when you look at the submission that an author will give to an agent and compare that to an agent to an editor, is there similarities there, or what's the difference between the types of submissions that you will give to like an editor compared to how an author will give to you?
So they're similar in some ways. I send a letter with the book to the publishers, and it will do some of the same things that a query letter does. So it will have a hook, it will have comparison titles, it will have a pitch. I'll then let the editors know what rights I'm offering. So whether I'm always offering UK and Commonwealth rights, excluding Canada, and then I'll try and sell the book in America, and I'll try and sell the book in translation into other countries as well. And I'll often set a deadline with a submission as well, which an author can't really do when they're sending it out. Get back to me in a week. Now, I'm not saying that editors are always particularly respectful of deadlines either, but I probably have a little bit more power in that scenario than an unagented writer does. But they are quite similar in what I'm doing. And when I send a book on to editors, I always put in 2 or 3 comparisons. Now, they might not always be book comparisons, they might be author comparisons, or sometimes they might be a film comparison. I remember with The Silent Companions, one of my comparisons was the film The Others, or I might mention a big video game franchise or a big TV series. I sold a novel last year by an author called, actually I sold it 2 years ago, it just came out this year, called 12 Secrets by an author called Robert Gold, and I pitched it as Harlan Coben meets Broadchurch. And that was the copy line that they tested and went down extremely well with readers. And the book's been a bestseller. It's a brilliant book. But I will always have those kind of shorthand comparisons in a cover letter to editors too.
Yeah.
And how important are, we hear about these big book fairs, there's London Book Fair, there's Frankfurt. How important is that to your process, to selling to editors and things like that?
So book fairs are important for us as an agency that sells a lot of foreign rights. So at book fairs, we will meet French publishers, German publishers, Taiwanese publishers, Korean publishers, American publishers, etc., etc. And it's a great chance to meet people that we already have books with and to discuss how the book has performed, to maybe show them the UK jacket or the US jacket, to share reviews or sales figures or other successes with them. So we will often see a spike in business around the book fairs. But I think that perhaps authors perceive them in a different way to how they actually are, if that makes sense. So the work of a book fair starts months in advance. It's not like I just show up at the book fair with some ring-bound manuscripts, as it was in the days of yore, where you would literally, I remember talking to the agent, running into her at Frankfurt, actually, the agent who sold Perfume, the Story of a Murderer. Oh, yeah. And she said she had literally showed up at the fair with 40 ring-bound printouts of this book, and people were coming to her table to read it and to make offers. Now we have email. That obviously doesn't happen anymore. So everyone probably already has the material, might have read the material, might have turned it down, or might still be on the fence. And that meeting is a chance to say to them, I know you haven't offered on this yet, but it's just hit number 5 in the UK. This is how many copies it's sold. Here's a physical copy as well. And actually being able to show someone how beautiful something looks, or it helps them see how it could work in their market. But the work of book fairs continues all year round. It's not a case that the book fair is, we wait and then we sell things at the book fair. And most books which are announced at the book fair, the deals were probably, I announced a deal at the book fair this year that I did 9 months earlier.
Oh, wow.
So lots of, everyone's always like, oh my gosh, these editors aren't sleeping. And I'm like, most of things were done some months ago.
And when you've got to the stage where the book's edited, you've got an offer from a publishing house. I presume at that point you then enter the contract stage of it. And what's the negotiations like at that point? And is that something the authors, do you butt heads with the author about what you're able to get for them? Is that something you've had a problem with?
No, not really, because fundamentally, sometimes an author will ask about something and I will be in the position of saying, they're never going to give this to us. I've been doing this job for 12 years at many agencies. I have never seen them give this thing. They will never give us this thing. So normally it's quite a straightforward process of me explaining it. But most authors sort of leave the agent to it, because that's one of the reasons you have the agent, right, is my expertise. So I know that Pan Macmillan normally offer X rate on trade paperback, or this paperback riser, or this high discount clause. Therefore, that is what I will be asking for. And the publisher will argue to give me the worst royalties I've ever had from them, and I will ask you to have the best royalties I have ever had from them in the deal. And you have more negotiating power as an agent than as an individual, because you're not negotiating as an individual. You're negotiating as someone that's maybe done 40 book deals with this publisher and will continue to work with this publisher for decades, and they will continue wanting you to sell them books and wanting to carry on doing business with you. So it's in their best interests to make sure that the deal they give you is as good as it can be. So negotiating as an agent is not normally too antagonistic, but there are occasional contracts departments where you just think, come on, look at the bigger picture here. You're arguing over something that a subsidiary right that we both know is never going to be exploited. So why are you being so difficult about this? But it's one of the reasons you have an agent, isn't it? Is to make sure that the business side of things is looked after as efficiently as possible.
Yeah. And what are the, I suppose, soft skills of being an agent that you use with authors and things like that?
So I love people. I would say I'm good with people. You're going to be sat there like, oh, she's terrible. She's the most awful person we've ever spoken to. I can assure you that's not the case. I'm glad. I'm pretty good with people, and I think I'm quite good at building a rapport with authors and editors as well. And I'm fair, I would say. And what I always say to authors is, I won't always tell them what they want to hear, but they can always trust that what I'm telling them is probably the right thing for their career. So sometimes it will be like, you know what, back down over this issue because of XYZ. Or sometimes it will be, I completely understand why you're really annoyed about it. Let me talk to the editor about it. And a lot of what you do as an agent as well is, I guess, pouring oil on troubled waters. So making sure that the author and the editor are both happy and have a good working relationship. Now that might mean occasionally stepping in and saying, you know what, I actually think this cover is the way to go, even if you don't like it. Or sometimes stepping in and saying, I think the publisher's making a huge mistake with the jacket, but I can say it in a much more diplomatic way because I'm so used to having those conversations. And you learn how to advocate as well, that you are advocating for an author and their best interests all the time, and making sure that their publishers are doing the best job they can for them.
And you know, when you're getting 8,000 submissions a year, do you have a kind of figure in your head of this would be my perfect number of clients, or I can't really manage more than X number? You know, how do you manage your time with all that kind of stuff?
I'm really funny about this because I always say, I just don't see numbers in a binary way that, you know, it's just, I never know. I've never had an exact number of clients in mind, because also, and I probably don't know off the top of my head how many clients I have, because some clients will lie dormant for 4 years, that they will write one book, I won't hear from them for another 3 years, then they'll deliver me another book. Or even authors that write a book a year, there'll be 6 to 9 months of the year where there's not anything to do for them, and it's in the run up to publication that I'm suddenly really busy. But how I always want my authors to feel is that they're my only client. And actually, it's something that lots of my authors do say about me, is that they often forget there are other people whose queries I am answering and who I am responding to, because the joke with getting an email back from me is they normally think I have an autoresponder on because I'm like that. And it's like, oh, Juliet's out of the, no, she's replied. She's chasing that up. She's getting the sales figures. I think I'm good at recognizing the difference between important work and busy work. I always remember one of my old bosses said to me, everyone in my office, it's lucky they can't hear me because they're sick of me saying this. They're just like, for the love of God, get a new pearl of wisdom, please, for all that. But basically, he always said that as an agent, it's incredibly easy to come to work, have a few meetings, have a few phone calls, answer some emails, and go home feeling exhausted, thinking you've done a good job. But what have you put out that day that's going to come back to you? What have you either made a submission, made a connection, sent something out, sent editorial notes to a client? What proactively are you doing? Because it is very easy to just be reactive. I was being laughed at this week because I said, oh, it's such a quiet day. I've only had 112 emails. This was at 12 p.m. And everyone was like, that's horrifying, Juliet. I said, no, normally I get 400 to 500 in a day. So I could probably spend all day just answering those. But what I try and do is think, okay, these are the things I can handle that no one else can handle. These are things that really do need a response, but actually what am I doing today that isn't to do with emails, that is going to come back either in a new deal for an author or a new connection with an editor or a new client. So that tends to be how I shape my day.
I mean, I'll be honest, I hear these numbers of emails, of submissions, and I find them quite terrifying. I think genuinely I would be paralyzed sitting there looking at these emails piling up. I don't know. I honestly don't know how agents manage their time and get work done and sign new clients. It does seem like you've got more hours in the day than most people.
I think lots of people do say that about me, that I maybe have like a secret clone army that are just hanging out and not just doing things for me. I'm just a very productive person. I'm naturally productive. I think my sister's exactly the same in her industry. We just get stuff done, and I can be quite antisocial. So I think sometimes agenting can be a job of lots of lunches and lots of breakfasts. It's very rare for anyone to drag me from my desk, because I always say the real work of agenting is the not glamorous stuff. The real work of agenting is actually the grind of sitting at my desk, reading submissions, responding to important queries, negotiating contracts. The rest of the stuff is kind of ephemera.
And what advice, I suppose, what one piece of advice would you give to authors just now who are going through the query process?
So try and find a way to separate yourself from the rejections. So I really firmly believe this. I think that as an author, you get a ton of rejections, and you don't just get rejections from agents. Even once you have an agent, you will get rejections from publishers, or you will get a terrible review from the Sunday Times, or your book won't sell very well, or you'll get dropped by your publisher. And I think if your entire sense of self comes from your writing, that is going to be a really miserable position to be in, because there are huge peaks, but also huge troughs in the creative process, because of course there's no author who basically has every single thing they touch turns to gold, and they've never had a bad review, they've never been shortlisted for a prize and not won, or what have you. So I would say try and separate your sense of self from your writing, and also remember that what's being rejected is that book, it's not you, but also it might not be your next book. So a few of my authors, 2 of whom are Sunday Times bestsellers, actually, I turned down for earlier novels, but I wasn't turning them down. I was turning that book down, and they went away, wrote a different book, got signed, became a successful writer on that book. So just because that book's not the one doesn't mean any book you write won't be the one.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Perseverance is the key, I think.
Yeah.
Well, those were the main questions that we had, but we always like to end every podcast by asking our guests the same questions. The first of which is, what was the last book that you read that you're able to tell us about?
What was the last book I read? I'm currently reading a book called Under the Banners of Heaven, which is about, I read a lot of depressing nonfiction, which is about the fundamentalist offshoots of Mormonism. And it's framed around the awful murder of a woman and her young child by her brothers-in-law. And then it uses that to explore the origins of the faith, but also some of the more extreme offshoots and the impact that they have on their communities. So that's what I am currently reading. I'm about halfway through it.
Is that the one that's Andrew Garfield's in a
adaptation? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I've heard of that before. Yeah. Oh, that sounds really good. What about the last film that you watched then?
The last film I watched 2 films this weekend. I'm a member of my Everyman Cinema, which is an unbelievably expensive membership, but you get unlimited tickets for 2 for an entire year. So I basically was like, I'm going to make them rue the day that they sold me this membership.
Gonna rinse them. Yeah.
They literally every day they're like, oh, it's you again. You're back to see something else. So I saw Top Gun on Saturday, which I loved, and then on Sunday I saw Jurassic World, which I thought was the best of the 3, but it's a little bit of a low bar. Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton is actually probably my most reread book of all time. I've read it upwards of 20 times. I love it. I think it's the perfect techno thriller, and the original film is great. But this was a fun popcorn film, I would say.
Cool.
Yeah, no, I'm not massively excited for this one, I have to say. But the first one, Jurassic Park, I saw it in cinema when it came back for the 20th anniversary, and it's amazing. It just totally holds up as
It's incredible.
It could be made last year. It's perfect. Yeah.
Agreed.
And what was the last TV show that you watched or are watching?
The last TV show I watched. I'm currently watching Kenobi.
Oh yeah.
Nice.
On Disney Plus. I watch a lot of reality TV, so I'm also watching the Kardashians every week. every week when it appears on my poor husband's Disney Plus profile, he's like, can you not use your own profile, please? So it's not just gonna come up on the homepage.
His algorithm's getting totally screwed. But
exactly. But a couple of things, as I said, I watch a lot of TV. A couple of things I've watched recently that I've loved. I love The Lincoln Lawyer. I thought that was an enormously entertaining adaptation. We're on to series 6 of The Mentalist, which is wildly fun, anarchic crime show about a fake psychic who works as a kind of profiler with the police force. And my favorite TV show, I think, actually of recent years was The Americans, which is
fantastic.
Deep undercover Soviet spies, what happens when an FBI agent moves in across the road from them. I think it's flawless. There's nothing I would do to
for a show that which has such a contrived setup. It never feels it's brilliant.
Never. One of my friends started watching it. She said, am I supposed to hate Elizabeth? And I said, yes. And she said, will I ever not hate Elizabeth? I said, no. But it doesn't really matter.
Brilliant. And the very, very last thing we always do is a super quick fire, either or. And I always say there's no right answer apart from one. But we'll start off with King Domino or Splendor, because I know you're a board game fan.
I love both of them so much. I actually just went on holiday and we packed both in our suitcase.
Wow, okay, this is a tough one then.
King Domino. King Domino if it's 2-player, if it's 4-player, Splendor.
Okay,
excellent. TV or cinema?
Cinema.
Night owl or early bird?
Night owl.
Fancy restaurant or takeaway?
Takeaway.
And the last one, real book or ebook?
I can't pick. I read in both. I'm one of those rare people that is completely format agnostic. I'm always a hardback, a trade paperback, or an ebook.
That's fine. That's a point for each, so that's fine.
Yeah.
I've struggled to get anyone to say ebook, so the fact you've said you can't choose is a win for me. So that's
a point. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page 1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.